He was only 23 when life started to weigh on him like a mountain. Every morning he woke up before sunrise in a tiny one-room apartment at the edge of the city. The walls were thin, the air smelled of instant noodles and laundry soap, and his dreams often got lost somewhere between unpaid bills and endless assignments. He was a student, a poor one, but not because he was lazy. He worked nights at a grocery store to cover rent, and spent his days chasing a degree that he hoped would change everything. He used to tell himself that his struggle was only temporary. Just a few more semesters, he whispered every time he skipped lunch to save a few coins. His family lived far away in a small rural town. His mother called him once a week, her voice full of pride but also worry. She didn't know how often he went to bed hungry or how many times he almost gave up. He never told her. He didn't want her to feel guilty for something that wasn't her fault. He had friends, but most of them came from better backgrounds. They talked about weekend trips, new phones, and plans after graduation. He smiled and nodded, pretending to relate, though inside he felt like a visitor in their world. When classes ended, he usually walked to the public library or a nearby cafe that stayed open late. It wasn't that he could afford coffee. He just needed the light, the Wi-Fi, and a quiet place where dreams didn't seem so impossible. One rainy night, everything changed. He was sitting in his usual corner of the cafe, typing on an old laptop that shut down whenever it overheated. The smell of roasted coffee filled the air. Outside, raindrops tapped softly against the glass. The place was almost empty except for an elderly woman sitting near the window. She wore a thick gray coat, pearls around her neck, and gloves even though they were indoors. Her posture was perfect, her expression calm but distant, like someone who carried too many memories. At first, he didn't pay attention. He was busy writing a research paper. But then, as he got up to refill his cup with water, the woman dropped something, a small leather purse that rolled under his chair. He picked it up quickly and handed it to her with a polite smile. "Thank you, young man," she said, her voice gentle yet strong. Most people these days pretend not to notice. He smiled shyly. "It's nothing, ma'am." But she kept looking at him. "You're studying, aren't you? I can tell by the way you keep staring at that screen." He laughed softly. "Trying to, yes. I'm at the university." She nodded as if that explained everything. "And working too, I suppose?" He hesitated. "Yes, nights at the store. It's not easy, but I'll manage." The woman smiled, a faint but genuine curve of her lips. "That's good. The world could use more young people who don't give up easily." He thanked her and returned to his seat, thinking the conversation was over. But a few minutes later, she walked to his table carrying a cup of coffee. "You look like you need this more than I do," she said, placing it in front of him. He tried to refuse, but she insisted. "Consider it a thank you for picking up my purse." They talked for a while that night. Her name was Eleanor Whitmore, though he didn't recognize it at first. She told him she used to be a teacher, then a businesswoman, and that she had retired years ago after her husband passed away. She lived alone now in a big house not far from the cafe. Her children had moved abroad and most of her friends were gone. She said she still liked to come out sometimes just to watch people. "It reminds me that life still moves," she said softly. He found her easy to talk to. She listened without interrupting, asked thoughtful questions, and laughed at his stories about the grocery store customers. When the cafe closed, she offered him a ride home, but he politely declined. He didn't want her to see where he lived. The next night, she was there again, sitting at the same table. And the next. After a week, they began greeting each other like old friends. Sometimes she brought him a sandwich or pastry, saying she had baked too much. Sometimes she just asked about his classes. Their conversations became the brightest part of his day. It wasn't long before he looked forward to seeing her. There was something comforting about her presence, a quiet strength, a patience that made him feel seen in a way no one else did. She too seemed to enjoy his company. He reminded her, she said, of her late husband when he was young, determined, gentle, and endlessly hopeful despite everything. Weeks turned into months. He told her about his dreams of becoming an engineer, of building something lasting. She told him about the days when her husband started their first company from a garage. Her life sounded like a movie, grand houses, parties, travel, yet she spoke of it all with a strange emptiness, as if those things had lost their meaning long ago. One evening, after closing time, she waited for him outside the cafe. "Walk with me," she said. I want to show you something. They walked slowly through the quiet streets. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the city lights. She led him to a small park where the trees were just starting to bloom. They sat on a bench, and for a while neither of them spoke. "Do you ever feel lonely?" she asked finally. He hesitated. "Sometimes, but I'm used to it." She looked up at the sky. "It never gets easier, you know. People think money, age, or success protect you from loneliness. They don't." He wasn't sure what to say, so he stayed silent. After that night, their bond deepened. She began to sponsor part of his tuition, insisting it was a loan that he could repay someday. He tried to refuse, but she said firmly, "You remind me of what kindness used to mean." Her generosity made his life easier. He could finally study without worrying about food or rent. But it also made him uneasy. He didn't want to feel like a burden. Then came the evening that changed everything. He was walking her to her car after another long conversation when she suddenly stumbled. He caught her just in time. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. "I'm fine," she said, smiling weakly, "just dizzy for a second." He offered to call someone, but she shook her head. "No need, I'll be fine. You worry too much." But that moment stayed with him. He started noticing small things. The way she sometimes forgot words. How she moved slower than before, how her hands trembled when she poured tea. He wanted to ask if she was okay, but he didn't know if it was his place. One weekend, she invited him to her home for dinner. He hesitated, afraid he wouldn't fit into her world, but she insisted. Her house was enormous, full of art, books, and the faint smell of roses. He felt awkward at first, but she made him feel at ease. They ate and talked for hours, laughing like family. Before he left, she said quietly, "You're a good man. Don't let this world harden you." That night he couldn't sleep. Something about her words felt heavier than usual. He thought about his own life, how hard it had been, how much kindness could change everything. He didn't know it then, but that dinner would be the first step toward something neither of them could have imagined. After that, he visited her more often. Sometimes he helped her organize papers. Sometimes he just kept her company. People in his neighborhood began to gossip. "Why's that young guy always with that old rich lady?" they whispered. But he didn't care. He wasn't doing it for money or attention. He just felt responsible, maybe even connected. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset from her garden, she said softly, "You know, people will talk about us. They always do. But I've lived long enough to stop caring." He smiled. "I'm learning that too." She looked at him for a long time before speaking again. "You've given me something money never could, peace." He didn't know how to respond. He just nodded, feeling something shift between them, a quiet, unspoken understanding that their lives, so different in every way, had somehow found common ground. As the days went by, that connection only grew stronger, but neither of them could have guessed where it would lead, or how one unexpected decision would change both their lives forever. Days turned into weeks, and their friendship deepened in ways that neither of them planned. He would stop by her house every few days to check on her, sometimes helping her with groceries, other times just sitting on the porch while she told stories about her younger years. She had a way of talking that made time slow down. Her words painted pictures of a world he had never known, old dances, handwritten letters, and summers in distant places. He noticed she laughed more now, and the sadness in her eyes had begun to fade. For him, those visits became a kind of escape. Her home was peaceful. It smelled of books, flowers, and cinnamon tea. When he sat there listening to her, all his worries, the rent, the exams, the future, seemed to quiet down. One Sunday afternoon, as he helped her water the plants in the garden, she asked, "Do you ever wonder why people come into your life at certain times?" He smiled. "All the time. I used to think it was random, but now, maybe it happens for a reason." She nodded slowly. "I used to think so too. But now I'm sure of it." There was something thoughtful in her tone that he didn't fully understand, so he didn't press. As the weeks passed, she insisted he join her for dinner more often. She said it was too quiet to eat alone. Sometimes she cooked. Other times they ordered takeout and ate while watching old movies. She told him about her husband, how he had been kind but strict, a man of discipline who built an empire from nothing. She spoke of his death softly, not with bitterness but with a tired acceptance. "He was a good man," she said once. "But after he was gone, I realized how much of my life I had given to his dreams. I don't regret it, but I wish I'd lived a little for myself too." He listened carefully, realizing that wealth didn't always mean happiness. He respected her more for her honesty. One day after finishing a long shift at the store, he went to see her. She was sitting on the couch, looking at old photographs spread across the table. "You look tired," she said. "Come sit." "I made tea." As they sipped in silence, she looked at him with a strange expression, part warmth, part hesitation. "You remind me so much of the man I loved," she said quietly. "Not my husband. Someone I knew before him." He didn't know how to respond, so he stayed quiet. She smiled faintly, brushing away the memory. "Don't mind me." Old hearts carry too many stories. But he couldn't stop thinking about that moment later. Something about the way she said it lingered in his mind. One evening, she asked him to accompany her to a charity event. She said it would mean a lot to have someone she trusted there. He hesitated at first. He didn't own the kind of clothes people wore to such events. But she insisted, and even bought him a suit. At the event, people stared. She introduced him as her dear friend, and he could see the curious looks in the crowd. Some smiled politely. Others whispered behind their glasses of wine. He felt out of place, but she didn't seem to care. She held her head high, her arm gently looped around his. When they left, he apologized. "I think people were judging you because of me." She laughed softly. "Let them. If they're still worried about gossip at my age, that's their problem, not mine." That night, as he walked her to the door, she stopped him. "You've brought light back into this house," she said. "I'd forgotten what it was like to have someone to talk to laugh with. You've given me something money can't buy." He smiled. "You've given me the same in your own way." After that, something shifted. Their bond felt deeper, almost sacred. Not romantic in a typical sense, but rooted in understanding. She treated him with kindness and care, and he felt a kind of loyalty to her that he couldn't explain. One cold evening, he found her sitting by the fireplace, staring into the flames. "You're quiet tonight," he said. She turned toward him and smiled faintly. "I've been thinking about life." "About how short it really is," he frowned. "Don't say that." "You're strong," she laughed softly. "Strong, yes. But time has its own plans. I don't fear it anymore. I just want to make sure I leave something meaningful behind." He didn't understand what she meant at the time, but those words would stay with him forever. A few days later, she invited him over again. This time the mood felt different. The house was warm, candles flickered, and soft music played in the background. She asked him to sit, then disappeared into another room for a moment. When she returned, she carried a small velvet box and set it on the table. "I have something to ask you," she said gently. He looked at her, confused. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "I want you to marry me." The words hit him like a wave. For a moment he thought he had misheard her. He stared speechless as she went on. "I know it sounds strange," she continued, her voice calm but sincere, "and I understand if you think I've lost my mind. But I'm serious." He stood up quickly. "Marry you? But why?" "I mean, you've been like family to me." "I don't understand." She folded her hands. "Because you've given me something I thought I'd never have again. Peace, trust, and care without any agenda. You see me as a person, not as a rich old woman. I want to spend whatever time I have left with someone who makes me feel alive again." He sat back down, still shocked. "But people will talk. They'll think I did it for money," she smiled. "Let them. They've been talking all their lives. It changes nothing." He looked at her eyes, clear, kind, and full of something deeper than pity. There was no manipulation in her voice, only truth. He wanted to speak, but no words came. That night, he couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in his mind. He thought of all the times she had helped him, how she had treated him with dignity even when he had nothing. He also thought of what people would say, the stares, the whispers, the judgment. The next morning, he went for a walk before dawn. The city was quiet and his mind raced. He had never felt so torn in his life. On one hand, he cared for her deeply, maybe more than he realized. On the other, he feared the world's cruel opinions. Later that day, he went back to see her. She opened the door before he could knock, as if she already knew he'd come. "I've thought about it," he said softly. "And if this is really what you want, then yes." She looked at him in silence for a long moment. Then tears welled up in her eyes, and not of sadness but gratitude. She took his hands gently. You won't regret it. I promise you that. The wedding was small and quiet. Only a few close friends of hers attended, along with one of his classmates who agreed to be a witness. There were no fancy decorations, no cameras, no music, just a few flowers and soft words exchanged in front of a local officiant. When the ceremony ended, she whispered, "Thank you." He smiled nervously. "For what?" "For giving me something to live for again." They moved into her house together, not as strangers but as two people who shared an unspoken bond. He helped her with small things, walking her in the garden, reading to her when she felt tired, making tea when her hands trembled. There was never any tension or discomfort between them, only a quiet companionship that felt natural. But the world outside wasn't as kind. People talked. Some laughed. Some called him names behind his back. Others said he had married her for her fortune. At first he tried to ignore it, but the whispers followed him everywhere, at work, at school, even online. One evening he asked her, "Does it bother you? What people say?" She smiled. "Not at all. They don't know what we have. Let them talk. Life's too short to live by their opinions." Her calmness amazed him. He realized then that she had already made peace with the world long ago. The days that followed were peaceful but full of quiet emotions. He began to see her differently, not as someone old and fragile, but as someone strong, wise, and deeply human. She treated him not as a husband in the usual sense, but as a companion, a friend, and a student of life. And though everything seemed still on the surface, something was changing beneath it, something she hadn't told him yet. The morning after she told him about her illness, the house felt different. The light seemed softer, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves had heard her words and decided to go quiet. He woke early, but she was already sitting by the window, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea steaming beside her. She turned and smiled weakly when he entered. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I kept thinking about what you said." She nodded. "I figured you might." He sat beside her, unsure of what to say. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with meaning, the kind of silence that carries love, fear, and gratitude all at once. Finally, he said, "You should have told me. I could have helped." She looked out the window, her voice calm. "You have helped, more than you know." He wanted to argue, but something in her tone told him not to. She looked peaceful, almost content, as if she had already made peace with everything that was coming. The rest of the morning passed quietly. He made her breakfast, helped her with her medicine, and tried to keep things normal. But inside, his heart ached. Every time she smiled, he wondered how many more times he would get to see it. In the afternoon, she asked him to sit with her in the study. It was her favorite room, lined with books, full of sunlight, and smelling faintly of old paper and roses. She had arranged a few papers neatly on the desk. "I have something for you," she said softly. He frowned. "You don't need to give me anything." She smiled a little. "I know, but this isn't about need. It's something I want to do." She handed him a sealed envelope. It was thick, with his name written carefully across the front. "Open it when I'm not here," she said. "Not now." He looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean, not here?" She reached out and took his hand. "Promise me, not now." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, I promise." She seemed relieved. Good. Some things are better understood in their own time. After that, she grew quiet again. They sat there for hours, not saying much. He read to her from her favorite book until she drifted off to sleep. When she woke, she asked for the radio to be turned on. A slow song played, one she said she used to dance to when she was young. For the first time since she told him the truth, he saw her smile fully again. "It's funny," she said. "When you're young, you think time will last forever. But then one day you wake up and realize it's been running out all along." He tried to smile back, but his throat tightened. "You still have time," he said quietly. She reached out, touching his cheek gently. "Maybe. But even if I don't, I'm at peace. You gave me that. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about the envelope. It sat on the corner of the desk, innocent and quiet, yet full of questions. What was inside? Why did she ask him to wait? He almost opened it, but stopped himself. A promise was a promise. The next morning, she seemed weaker. Her voice was faint and her movements were slower. He called the doctor, but she waved it off. No hospitals, she said firmly. I want to stay here. This is my home. He nodded, though his heart sank. He spent the whole day by her side. They talked about small things, her favorite flowers, the music she loved, the first book she ever bought. She seemed to enjoy remembering those moments, her eyes glowing softly with each story. In the evening, she asked him to sit with her in the garden. The air was cool, and the sky painted shades of orange and gold. Do you believe in fate? She asked suddenly. He thought for a moment. I didn't used to, but after meeting you, maybe I do. She smiled. Then maybe this was fate too. You came into my life just when I needed someone most. He felt his eyes sting. You changed my life, he said. You gave me hope when I had none. Then we saved each other, she said softly. They stayed there until the sky turned dark. When she got tired, he helped her back inside and tucked her into bed. Before turning off the light, she took his hand and said, Don't be sad. Every ending is just a doorway to something new. He nodded, his voice breaking. I'll try. Good, she whispered. Now go rest. Tomorrow will be a new day. But tomorrow came differently than he expected. He woke to the sound of silence, a kind of silence that felt wrong. He rushed to her room, his heart pounding. She was lying peacefully, her face calm, her hands resting over her chest. The faintest smile touched her lips as if she had drifted away in a dream. For a long time, he just stood there, frozen. Then he sat beside her and held her hand, which was already growing cold. He didn't cry at first. He just sat in disbelief. It wasn't until later, when the house filled with the echo of his own breathing, that the tears came. He called the authorities, arranged everything as she had instructed in advance, and watched as they took her away. It felt like watching a part of himself disappear. When the house grew quiet again, he remembered the envelope. He walked slowly to the study, sat at the desk, and held it in his shaking hands. He stared at his name written in her careful handwriting. Then, with a deep breath, he opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter and a few documents neatly folded together. The letter began simply, My dear, if you're reading this, then I have already gone. Please don't be sad. I want you to remember me not with tears, but with gratitude. He paused, his eyes blurring. When I met you, I had already made peace with my life. I thought I had lived everything worth living. But you reminded me what kindness feels like. You made me laugh again. You made me believe that goodness still exists in the world. He wiped his eyes and kept reading. I know our marriage confused people. Let them think what they will. What matters is what it meant to me, and to you if you choose to see it that way. The documents with this letter are legal papers. I've transferred a large part of my estate, the house, the savings, and the foundation I once built, to your name. It's not charity and it's not a gift. It's my way of saying thank you. You gave me love without asking for anything in return. Please use it wisely. Help others, build something lasting, and never lose the kindness that brought you to me. He stared at the papers, unable to breathe. His hands trembled as he realized what she had done. The letter continued. Don't feel guilty. You earned this not through marriage, but through the goodness of your heart. I saw in you the same hope I once had when I was young. The belief that life could be better, that love could be purer. Don't let the world change that. You'll face judgment, but truth doesn't need defense. Remember what I told you. Real love is not about possession or time. It's about impact. How one soul touches another. You touched mine. Now go touch the world. With love and peace, E. He sat there for a long time, staring at the pages. The room felt both heavy and light at once. Heavy with loss, light with the weight of her words. He couldn't believe that in her final days, she had been thinking of him, planning something to secure his future. He looked around the study, the books, the plants, the faint scent of her perfume still lingering in the air, and whispered, "Thank you." Over the next few days, he handled the legal matters, met with her lawyer, and learned that everything in the letter was true. The estate had indeed been transferred to his name. People talked, of course, in the newspapers, the neighbors, even strangers online. They called him names, accused him of trickery, of manipulation. But he didn't respond. He stayed quiet, just like she would have wanted. Instead of running from the noise, he focused on honoring her wish. He used part of the inheritance to pay off his studies, and then started a small scholarship fund in her name, for students who came from poor backgrounds like his. He wanted others to have the chance she had given him. At night, when the house grew quiet, he sometimes sat by the window where she used to sit. He would hold the letter in his hands and read it again, line by line. It reminded him that love, in its purest form, doesn't always fit the world's idea of what it should be. Sometimes it's just two souls crossing paths, one leaving light, the other carrying it forward, and in that light he found peace. Weeks turned into months after she was gone, but the house still felt like she was there. Her scent lingered faintly on the blankets. Her favorite cup stayed on the kitchen shelf, and her laughter still echoed in his memory whenever he walked through the halls. It was strange how someone could leave such a deep presence even after their body was gone. Every morning he woke up early, just like she used to. He would make tea the way she liked it, even though no one else was there to drink it. It wasn't about the tea, it was about remembering. It was his quiet way of keeping her spirit alive. The first few months were hard. People whispered about him. Some called him lucky, others called him a liar. They said he must have planned everything, that he had married her for money, not love. He tried not to listen, but words have a way of finding their way inside, no matter how hard you try to block them out. He stopped going out for a while. He didn't want to face the judgmental stares. Instead, he stayed home and buried himself in the tasks she had left behind, sorting papers, reading her notes, cleaning out her study. That was when he found the small notebook she always kept by her bedside. Inside were pages filled with her handwriting, thoughts, memories, and reflections. Some were short sentences, others were full letters she never sent. On one page he found a line that struck him deeply. "The most beautiful thing we can give someone is not our wealth or youth. It's our time, because it's the one thing we can never get back." He read that line over and over. It reminded him of all the evenings they had spent together, talking for hours, laughing over stories, sharing silence without feeling awkward. That was what she had given him, her time, her trust, her truth. That night, as he sat alone in the living room, he realized something. She hadn't left him the money just for him to live comfortably. She had left it so he could make something out of it, something meaningful. The next day, he went to the university he once struggled to pay for. He met with the financial aid office and asked about the process of starting a scholarship fund. The woman at the desk looked surprised when he told her he wanted it to be named after someone else. He smiled softly and said, "She helped me when I had nothing. I want to make sure someone else gets that same chance." The process took weeks, paperwork, signatures, meetings with lawyers. But he didn't mind. Every form he filled out, every letter he wrote, felt like a small way of saying thank you. When the scholarship was finally approved, he stood in front of the plaque with her name on it and whispered, "You're still helping people, just like you wanted." The first group of students who received the scholarship came from backgrounds much like his. Kids who worked part-time jobs, kids who dreamed big but feared life would hold them back. He met them personally, told them about kindness, about how one act of love can change everything. But he never told them the full story. He didn't want them to see it as pity or luck. He wanted them to believe in effort, in heart, in compassion. Over time, life began to move again. The house didn't feel so heavy anymore. The days didn't feel so long. He still missed her, but the ache wasn't as sharp. It had turned into something softer, a quiet warmth that lived inside him. Sometimes when he sat in the garden, he could almost feel her presence. The wind would brush against his face, and for a moment it felt like her hand. He continued his studies, finished his degree, and became a teacher, something she had always encouraged him to do. "Teach what you've lived," she used to say. "Not just what you've read," so he did. He didn't just teach from books. He taught from life. He told his students about honesty, kindness, and respect. He taught them that success wasn't just about grades, it was about character. And whenever he saw a struggling student, he thought of her and found a way to help. Years passed. The scholarship grew larger, funded not just by him but by others who believed in what it stood for. He was invited to speak at events to share his journey. People always asked him the same question: what made him so passionate about helping others? He never told them everything. He would just smile and say, "Someone once showed me what love really means." But one evening during a student event, a young woman came up to him. She had tears in her eyes and said, "The scholarship saved me. I was going to quit school, but because of you, I'm still here. Thank you." He felt his chest tighten. He looked at her and said softly, "Don't thank me. Thank the woman who believed kindness can change a life." That night he went home and sat by the fireplace, holding the old letter she had written. He had read it so many times that the edges were worn, but it still gave him comfort. He thought about how strange life was, how a poor student who once couldn't afford a meal ended up being the one who now helped others eat, study, and dream, all because one person chose to see beyond what the world saw. One day, a journalist came to interview him about the scholarship. She was curious about why he had dedicated so much of his life to this cause. He hesitated at first, then decided to tell her a small part of the truth. He told her about meeting a woman who changed his life with compassion and courage. He told her that she had taught him the value of giving without expecting anything back. The journalist asked, "Do you ever miss her?" He smiled gently. "Every day," he said. "But I also see her every day, in every student who smiles when they get a chance, in every person who chooses kindness when it's easier to walk away." That's how she lives on. The story spread quietly, not in a sensational way, but in a heartfelt one. People began donating to the scholarship. Letters came in from strangers saying they had been touched by his story. He never sought fame. He only wanted to make sure her name wasn't forgotten. Years later, when he grew older, he often sat on the same garden bench where they once talked about fate. The house had aged, the trees had grown taller, and life had changed in countless ways. But one thing stayed the same: his gratitude. He kept a small framed photo of her in the living room. It wasn't a glamorous picture, just a candid shot of her laughing one afternoon when he had accidentally spilled tea. It was simple, real, and full of life. Whenever visitors asked about the photo, he would tell them, "That's the person who taught me that love doesn't always come the way you expect, but it always comes when you need it most." And when he spoke those words, his eyes would soften and his heart would feel light again. As the years passed, he continued to write in a journal, much like she did. In one of his last entries he wrote, "She didn't buy my love. She invested in my heart. Everything I've built since then carries a piece of her kindness. Maybe that's what love really is, leaving something good behind in another person." He closed the journal and looked around the quiet room. The house no longer felt empty. It was full of memories, laughter, and legacy. It was full of her. When he finally grew old and frail, people around him often said he looked peaceful. Maybe it was because he had lived a life with purpose, one built not on wealth or power, but on gratitude and love. And when his time came, those who knew him best said they found him sitting by the window, holding that same letter in his hands. His face wore a calm smile, as if he had just finished a long conversation with someone he loved. Beside him was a note written in his shaky handwriting. It said simply, "Love never dies. It just changes homes." And in those few words, the story that began with two people from different worlds found its quiet, beautiful end. Because in the end, it wasn't about the marriage, the money, or the rumors. It was about something purer. A connection between two hearts that taught the world that kindness can outlive time. And love, no matter how unexpected, always leaves a mark that never fades.